Thank you for joining us on this, what happens to be a rainy night, to celebrate Charles Atlas before his exhibition closes next week. I'm Monica Garza. I'm the Charlotte Wagner Director of Education here at the ICA. And we are very, very grateful to Charles for his Boston visit, and also to the Bridget and Bruce Evans Public Program Fund for helping make tonight's Artist Voice program possible. Now, I have the impossible task to introduce our guest speaker, an individual who needs really no introduction. In articles, he has been called a maverick, a pioneer, a trailblazer, and a groundbreaking artist. And if you've had a chance to see his exhibition at the ICA upstairs or read through the accompanying exhibition catalog, you know why such terms describes Charles Atlas. Charles has lived and worked in New York City since the 1970s. And over the decades, he has expanded what a film and video camera can do and has influenced generations of artists in the process. Charles's early career is defined by his time as filmmaker in residence at the Merce Cunningham Dance Company, New York, where the genre of media dance, that is, dance made for the camera rather than an in-person audience, originated. Since leaving the dance company in 1983, he continued to capture dance and performance for the camera through various collaborations with noteworthy individuals, which you will hear more about later this evening. Charles's work has been shown from TV screens to multi-screen installations. His work is also included in the permanent collections of prominent institutions, such as the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Metropolitan Museum of Art, Tate Modern, SF MoMA, and many more. And just last year, in 2024, Charles's archives were acquired by the Getty Research Center to continue to inspire and inform researchers and artists in the future. The ICA's featured exhibition, Charles Atlas About Time, is the first U.S. Museum Survey exhibition of his work. It is a landmark exhibition organized by the ICA's Mannion Family Curator, Jeffrey DeBlois. The accompanying catalog is also a triumph. Following our talk, you are all welcome to join us behind the screen on the stage to purchase a limited number of pre-signed books and posters that Charles generously inscribed for us today. We also hope you will take another look at the exhibition in our galleries as well, which close at 9 p.m. this evening. And now, without further delay, please help me welcome Charles and Jeffrey to the stage.
We made it.
Yeah.
Here we are. It's the last week of your show.
Yeah.
It's surreal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here with us tonight. I would be remiss if I didn't start just with a few thanks, especially for my colleagues, because this was a massive undertaking. I never even counted the number of projectors and monitors and screens in the show because I was a little bit too mortified to do it at the time that we were putting it up. But I really just want to say thanks to Jill Medvedow and Ruth Erickson in particular for just the visionary support that went into helping us make this exhibition possible, and my great colleague Max Gruber, who was with us every step of the way to organize the show. And maybe thanks especially to our great exhibitions team. So to Tim Obitz, Charlie Kroll, Allison Hatcher, my beloved colleague who is soon retiring, Liv Beal, and Melissa Lotery. Without them and without the incredible expertise that we have on our team, it just would have been impossible to do such an ambitious undertaking. So I'm forever grateful to them for just making it possible. Yeah, thank you. And of course, thanks as well to all of my wonderful colleagues across the museum and every department for all of the support of this project. And Charlie, let's just get into it, shall we? So I wanted to start kind of at the end, and I know having a show like this, a retrospective, a survey, was something that you thought about for a really long time. And I was reminding you that it was kind of hilarious that once we confirmed the exhibition, you had thought about it for so long that you were just like, okay, where do we start? Like, what do we do now? But I just wanted to give you an opportunity to reflect for a second at the end of the run of the show that what has it meant for you to have this opportunity? What surprised you? What was different than you thought it would have been in terms of how you feel about having this exhibition?
Well, I felt after we put it up and put everything together, I felt like it really summarized everything. It consolidated things in a way I'd never shown more than one piece at a time. And so to see all the things together and realize how much it gave the flavor of of my project, it was very satisfying. I mean, and putting it together 6 months or 5 months ago, I was very excited and came away with, I don't know, just a feeling of satisfaction.
And I remember during install at one moment when we finally got everything on and running, you were like, oh, I guess I never really thought about how it was going to be everything. You know, and it was really, I remember feeling like it was like a staggering undertaking, and then to see it all come together was really
Because I didn't know how we would achieve, because I'd done so much work and so much different kinds of work, and that's why I'd always wanted to have this, a big show, is because I felt like I've worked in New York, I've worked in London, I've worked in Paris, people didn't, in one place never knew what the body of my work really was, and it's not even evident always in the show, but this got a good flavor of what's going on. And then when I came back to New York, it was like kind of surreal. I mean, it was like a memory, out of place, out of time. Yeah. I knew the work was going on, but I wasn't there. I come from the world of performance where you get more immediate feedback from the audience.
Yeah.
And so I knew my work was going on and people were seeing it, but I didn't know who and how they were being received. And I'm just glad that it was up for a while and a lot of people got to see it.
Yeah, and it unfolds over time too. And even like as curators, we never know what our relationship to a project will be until we live with it. And it's like, that's, you know, the perspective always changes, like at its best, like as you're living with it. And so I think, you know, I'm going to kind of ask you questions, like almost as if a walkthrough of the exhibition. So we're going to start in the first room with the image that you see here for a work called The Years that you made in 2018, actually a kind of response to the question that you had for yourself, will I ever get a retrospective exhibition? And so you made this work, maybe I won't, so I'll make an artwork that is its own kind of standalone retrospective. So what you see here are these 4 monitors, each of them represents 12 years of your work, and on each of the monitors is sequences, edited sequences of scrolling works that you made within these 12-year periods, essentially between 1970 and 2017 when you made the work. And then kind of the most puzzling part of the work, as you can see in the background, is these 4 young people who stand kind of dispassionately staring out against the backdrop of the night sky. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to ask you, you know, what were you thinking when you staged these 4 people staring back?
When I first conceived of the piece, I thought of it as a video graveyard, and these were 4 tombstones showing my work, which isn't a bad idea. And I wonder why more people don't have it, actually.
The future.
But the question I was asking myself is, in 50 years, what would my work still be relevant, and what would the relevance of my work would be? And the 4 women that I asked to be as witnesses, I imagined them as my future audience. They'd be still alive when 50 years is up. So they're all 14 at the time. And someone else interpreted it as contemporary youth, puzzling over what my work was really about, because it wasn't the internet or anything. So, and then.
But they are scrolling images. It does have a kind of like.
Well, I mean, I made it in the shape of an iPhone, and so you scroll up like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it had many meanings, and then I put dust in the background, just to universal.
And I would say that this is one of my favorite images of you from one of my favorite works, one of your earliest works, Cartridge Lengths and Long Shots from 1970, that actually appears. This is the first image that you see, is this incredible image of you learning how to teaching yourself how to use the Super 8 camera. You're on tour with the Merce Cunningham Dance Company in a hotel room in the Netherlands.
In the dressing room in the Netherlands.
In the dressing room in the Netherlands. Another work that's a favorite, your work with Carol Armitage, Parafango, which was made for French television, and the first time that you worked with Michael Clark, here on the left. It's a Jackie Thing, an incredible work that you made in 1999, and these are just really quickly some of the works that appear in the years. And then this work that I really love, that's really quiet, called What Does Unstable Time Even Mean? And this was made in 2015 as part of a larger project, but it's a really staggering work of performance for camera.
It was inspired by Rick and Morty. That's a direct quote from Rick. What does unstable time even mean?
And next, you're someone who's always been a collaborator, kind of with an ever-enlarging group of artists and performers, and it's well known and documented that Merce Cunningham was your first and kind of most important collaborator, the dancer and choreographer, and one of the most important artists of the 20th century and most influential in many ways, and himself a kind of serial collaborator, if you will, with his partner John Cage and Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns and others, and really kind of set a high watermark in ways for collaboration. So I wanted to ask you, what about your long time working with Merce, and you worked together, you collaborated over a period of 40 years with a kind of 15-year break, as you describe it. But what did you learn from Merce more generally, and what about collaboration did you take with him once you left the dance company?
Well, it was Merce. I always describe him as the gold standard of collaboration. And I was very young when I started with him, and
like here.
like that. And yet he welcomed my ideas as if I was an equal, and I kind of grew into that, but I didn't really feel like I was kind of intimidated with him when I first started working with him. And we learned, I taught him video, and when I started that, I thought I should learn to dance. So I went to the fundamentals class, which they call the zoo class. And I never made it out. And I made it to the beginners occasionally, but I couldn't turn. So, and what I really learned from Merce is I picked up this bad habit of daily work, workaholism, and daily practice, and also the way to approach a project is to ask questions and to really see what all the possible answers were, to consider all the possible answers before you decided on which direction you were going to take. Mm-hmm. And he was a very good friend and a great collaborator.
And you've also said before that he taught you how to see.
Well, he taught me how to see dance. I mean, I'm in the editing process after the first few pieces. I call it my classical training in dance. I really got to see what was good about a performance and where phrasing was, and it informed all the rest of my work.
And when Merce passed away in 2009, or around the time that he passed away, your work radically changed. And, as you've said, you were someone who never really looked back. You always looked forward at the next project. But then around that time, I think, maybe partly coming to terms with that big change in your life, you started to look back and you started to reconceive of your work in different ways. And it was really important as an idea for me in thinking about how to organize an exhibition like this that is impossible otherwise to do. I mean, you've made hundreds of videos. Like, it would just be not possible within an exhibition to do that kind of comprehensive survey for you. But you came up with this way of talking about your work, which I just so happened to see at the end of a video that MoMA produced with you when you were invited to be an exhibition designer for their Robert Rauschenberg exhibition, where they let you talk about your own work at the end, and you said, well, lately I've been making exploded views of my work to rethink them as walk-through experiences. So I sat with that, and I don't know, something of a light bulb I feel like went off in my head that is maybe one approach to answering the problem of the question of how you do a survey of moving image work of someone who's been so prolific as you.
I never really liked the idea of, I mean, I've done a lot of pieces that are half-hour long, hour long, and I never really liked the idea of people sitting in the gallery or museum sitting down and watching a film. I just don't think that's the right way to use a gallery space or an installation. So I wanted to figure out another way to do it, and I wanted to be, I had been showing my work in museums, but mainly as single channel pieces. And I didn't find that very satisfactory either. So I really was thinking about a museum room as a place, as a walkthrough experience, and so MC9, the first multi-channel installation I did like that, was 9 channels of video, and I put in my favorite shots that I'd done over the years, and I put in countdowns and color fields to make as a timing device, and the numbers and the beeps interrupt the images, and then you can see them fresh again when they come back. So that was the way I made that piece, and the sound was all the sound that really went with the pieces, but it was a John Cage idea of any sound could mix with anything, so it really worked as an installation. Whereas when I did a Prune Twin, it was different because the music was so important to the images.
Mm-hmm. And then it was really clear for us in the planning of the show, we knew kind of exactly what works we wanted to include in the show, and that, you expressed, I want to make a new work as part of the show, so we really thought together about what would that new work be based on what feels like it's missing from the show, and kind of where we landed was thinking about making a new work, and that's the work that you see here, Personalities, that we premiered in the exhibition, that I think is about your work as a portraitist. I mean, I think like in terms of moving images, if not otherwise, you're one of the great portraitists, and it's just been a huge part of all of the work that you've been making for so long. And so thinking about a way of creating a collage of portraits. And so how did you think about organizing all of the portrait work that you've been doing with your friends and collaborators and more into a new piece for the exhibition?
Well, I wanted to use the old-fashioned monitors, and since you had 3x4 monitors, most of the work I did was before 2000, which was all 4x3, and so I wanted to make a piece with monitors, which is usually not what I would think of doing. And I wanted to make, so I picked, just a random number of 12, I made a 12-channel piece, and each channel had either a single person that I've worked with or a single film. A couple of them have 2 or 3 people in it. And it was a problem about the sound, and so I couldn't have all this. I didn't want to have another piece with all the sound mixing.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to have one sound at a time, and so I just picked 30 seconds bits out of it, but you couldn't tell where it was coming from unless you happened to be in front of that monitor at the right time.
Yeah, it's like a game of cat and mouse, and it's interesting. I mean, the bright orange color of the walls always make me wonder, like, is it also a portrait of you in a way? Because, like, you know, your psychedelic sunrise sideburns are such like a signature part of you for so long, and the association with the color orange, and then the way that we kind of, not something that people would ever know, like, but that we're both obsessed with the movie Vertigo, and so that's why the pedestals are in a spiral, and so there's something that feels like it's also about you. Do you think that that's true?
Well, I mean, I think all portraits are a portrait of both the sitter and the portraitist.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to focus really on the people in front of me more than myself, but I come in my way I approach it. So a lot of them are kind of funny.
Well, yeah, your sense of humor always comes through, that's for sure. Next, I wanted to just ask you, right? Next, I wanted to just, you know, your work drastically changed after you left the dance company, and one of the most iconic works that you've made, that is one of your most well-known, is Hail the New Puritan, which you made in 1986. And it's just so drastically different from the more reserved, kind of formal work that you did with Merce, and is part of the installation of Prune Twin that you made based on 2 collaborative works that you made with Michael Clark for a show at the Barbican in 2020. It's just a radical departure. There's overt sexuality, kind of really for the first time. There's a pop sensibility. The sense of music is completely different.
I mean, you know, I was a collaborator with Merce, and I went along. As a collaborator, I accepted his aesthetic, and at a certain point, it was all in the studio, and it was all very pure and non-referential, and I wanted to make some things that were more about my life. So the first piece I made was Secret of the Waterfall with Douglas Dunn, and we did it in Martha's Vineyard. So I went out of the studio, and that allowed a lot of different changes. And when I met Michael Clark, I immediately wanted to work with him, and it was before he was very well known. And by the time, it took 2 years to get that project together, and they wanted me to make an hour-long arts documentary for television, and I didn't want to do that. So I just took the money and ran. And I made Hail the New Puritan, and I used everything that I ever learned with Merce in a completely different context, which really corresponded to my life. And Michael was a kindred soul. I mean, he had a huge sense of irony and transgressiveness, and he was a fascinating character to work with.
And can you talk about like what that group of people in London in the mid-'80s was like? I know you've sort of described them in the past as like that you gravitated towards them, or they had this kind of magnetic presence that reminded you of like the folks around Warhol in the 60s in New York or something like that. But what was it like in that moment to make a piece like this?
Well, I landed in London, and I just felt like this is my chance. This is I'm the right person at the right time with the right collaborators. And we really had fun most of the time for the year and a half of research.
It seems like it when you watch the video, that's for sure.
And that was the point, really. I mean, after my work with Merce, we really planned everything out very carefully, and the shooting was really a chance of getting the shots right. So sometimes I know one movie we did 38 takes of one shot and we never got it right. But so it wasn't really, it was work.
Yeah.
And after that, I decided that I wanted to have more fun in the shooting, and then I would give that to the editor, which was me, and I would have to make something out of it. So
Yeah.
So I had fun both in the shooting and the editing.
And when you returned to these two works that you made with Michael Clark, so this is a still from Because We Must, which is a second piece that was based on a performance at Sadler's Wells Theatre in London, but then restaged with this kind of like behind-the-scenes narrative fantasy that plays out. But when you returned to these two works, did you think about making the walkthrough experience of this work differently than MC9, and how so?
Well, I mean, it's one of the things when I said I wanted to make a walkthrough experience. The curator at the Barbican Gallery, who was doing a show about Michael, wanted to commission me to do a piece. And I said, well, I've always wanted to do a piece exploding Hail the New Puritan. And she said, oh, great, that sounds great. And when I was commissioned to do that, I thought, oh my God, what have I got myself into? Because it was a very different kind of construction, because Michael's work depends so much on the music, and I was going to make a 20-minute piece, 8 channels, and so I decided it would be only 2 sounds at once, not like John Cage, which is all the sounds at once. So I would have only one sound at one side of the room, and one sound at the other side of the room, so that I had to pick out of about 2.5 hours of material, 40 minutes of sound, and that's how I organized the piece. I mean, again, with knowing it. And sometimes and making things that went together, like when Michael's being interviewed, there's Chopin music on the other side, so it doesn't interfere too much. And with the fall, it's something else. So it resulted in a different kind of piece and a different feeling, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like the real...
And also there was more of a narrative. There are a lot of narrative elements in it, which there weren't in the Merce film.
There's just like an entirely different sensibility to all of it too, which I think is punctuated in the way that you've edited into this new work, A Prune Twin, because like, Lee Bowery's costumes couldn't be more different, than the costumes like from the dance company with Merce, and in some ways the sense of like the pop music of the fall, or even Glenn Branca or Elvis or whatever other music is in it, couldn't be more different than like the David Tudor.
Michael Clark is a music aficionado, and
so did he choose the music?
All the music.
Yeah.
Because he chooses the music before he makes the dance.
Yeah.
So he was a avid reader of New Musical Express, and he picked the idea that he collaborated with Marky Smith was shocking.
To whom?
Marky Smith of the Fall.
Yeah, but who was it shocking to?
Me.
Yeah. Why?
Because Marky Smith is such a northern English homophobe.
Fair.
And yet they seem to get along, up to a point.
Yeah. And then there was another moment in the planning of the show, and it's like it was just an impossible task in some ways. You've done so many different kinds of work. There's a whole part of your practice that we couldn't encapsulate in the show, being like the live video work that you've done, the sort of live performance and video work. But another thing that felt like it was missing was your practice as a site-specific artist doing large-scale projections. So can you talk about how you thought about this room and Plato's Alley in particular, maybe in the background that people see as one of the original Numbers works and a site-specific work that has a kind of environmental condition?
Well, Plato's Alley, the Numbers piece at the end, was made for, again, all of my work for installation really starts with a space. So this was part of an installation at Vilma Gold Gallery in London, a 2-room installation called Tornado Warning. And one room was a very turbulent room with swirling images and tornadoes and a lot of activity in human bodies. And then I wanted to make the other room silent, and I gave myself, I said I would only use straight lines and the numbers 1 through 6 and make a piece out of that. I didn't really even want to use the numbers. I wanted to somehow be able to represent 1 through 6 with blocks. But I did that at the beginning, but then there was no place to go, so I had to use the numerals. And that became, I came on the idea of using numbers because when people had asked me for storyboards for my films, I never had storyboards for my films. But the editing notes are just nothing but pages of numbers of time code. So I thought, oh, this is a good idea. I can use numbers. And I wanted, and this was the first time I had a bigger gallery to work in. So the Plato's Alley was a long, narrow room. So that's why I just devised this idea that on the wall in the back would be part of it, and then it would spread out on the side walls, all with one projector. And then that made me want to do bigger and more big installations. So I did some other big gallery installations, and then I had this commission in Chicago to do the facade of the Merchandise Mart, which was 2.5 acres. We used 32 projectors, and so I and a lot of windows in it. So,
how do you approach doing that work differently?
Well, it's all math. I mean, that's really the basis of all my site-specific works is really math. I divided it into a certain number of areas, and I mean that's the way all of the mathematics of consciousness and the geometry of thought. And I know I was thrilled to work at that scale. Although, you know, when I was not really impressed, when I looked at it, I wasn't really impressed with the scale because I had been working on it on a computer, so I could just really see the piece. But I think it was impressive, the scale.
Well, yeah, for sure. And then the exhibition upstairs actually ends with this work, The Tyranny of Consciousness from 2017, which is actually a combination of 3 works. It includes these sunsets that you captured at the Rauschenberg Residency in Captiva Island, Florida. It's this clock that counts down from 18 to 0 and kind of has this kind of looming presence in the gallery in a way. And it's overlaid with this great monologue by Lady Bunny from another portrait that you made of the iconic drag performer Lady Bunny. Really, I think, speaking about the flowering of her political consciousness and from a particular moment in time, too, where she's also talking about things that happened earlier in the 20th century. And I think it represents a departure in your work in some ways, or at least a kind of like evolution of the politics of your work in a different direction.
I mean, it was based on a piece called The Waning of Justice, which was an 8-channel piece. And so these are just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the channels. And The Waning of Justice really was the most complete piece that I think I've done that really had everything that I wanted to have in it.
In what sense? What did you want it to have?
I wanted to have I mean, I made the piece of when I showed the 3 numbers piece, and I forget what year that was, a few years before this. I call it the illusion of democracy. And this one is The Waning of Justice, which I think has unfortunately come to pass. I have a political consciousness, but I don't really express it directly in the work. So so I was making this piece, and the sunsets, it's the most corny image that I could ever think of.
And you also said it was like the first time that you'd ever like captured footage of a landscape to begin with.
Yeah, I was not a nature guy. But so when I was capturing it, I thought, oh, well, I'll cover this. This will be the basis, the bottom layer, and I'll cover it over with something else so you can't tell that it's really sunsets. But then when I finally got around to making the piece, I made this decision to use the sunsets in various ways in the various channels. And the Lady Bunny piece was a 35-minute branch in an adjacent room that you could hear in the front room. Mm-hmm. So this was a distillation of that. And I know it's very doom heavy.
Yeah. Do you feel like, I mean, it's interesting because The Waning of Justice in many ways is really different than The Tyranny of Consciousness, even though they're kind of sister pieces for all of the reasons that you're describing. They're kind of two different combinations of the same material in really different, presentation formats, and they each have a different sense of meaning.
They needed to, when I made the sunsets, I thought I'd really need something really contrasting to go with this because I just can't have sunsets. And so that's when I approached Lady Bunny and said that you're on my bucket list, you have to do this. So we did the shooting with the Lady Bunny, and then when I condensed it, I thought that I really needed to, even though it wasn't visually represented, I needed to represent Bunny with the sunsets before she sings the song at the end. Mm-hmm. So that was really part of the piece.
Mm-hmm. And then after the sunset, after the 18-minute clock counts down, the screen goes black after you hear bagpipes, and interestingly, the same bagpipes that you used in Hail the New Puritan that you repurposed in this piece.
Because we must.
Because we must. And then Lady Bunny comes on screen and sings this, like in her unique way, this amazing disco song that she produced herself, and about this kind of moment and about this work and about the waning injustice in particular. You've said the world should end and then there should be a disco song.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say that?
That's exactly what I mean.
That's exactly. Well, can you expand on it?
I don't know what else to say.
Okay, I'll ask you a different question about this piece. So it's one interesting difference between The Tyranny of Consciousness, where you can kind of edit the monologue of Lady Bunny differently, or you overlay it differently, versus The Waning of Justice, where, I'm kind of curious, is Lady Bunny's kind of expression of politics in somehow a mouthpiece for your own? Because then there are moments that you redacted what she's saying.
In preparation for the shooting, I had lunch with Lady Bunny a few times and talked about what was on my mind, which was peace and the fact that there was no more representation of peace. It was all about war. And
so that idea came from you, not from her?
But I had seen her on stage and knew she was very political and very extreme political. Mm. I mean, way left. Mm-hmm. Now I don't know. She's always perverse. Anyway, so in the longer piece, there were things that she said that I didn't like. I mean, I didn't think would help, so I just had her keep moving her mouth, but cut the words out.
How did she react to that?
She said, "You'll never top this."
I know. She said, "This is the best piece you've ever made." She said that when she was here too. I can imagine why. I guess we'll open it up for questions from folks in a minute, but I guess I kind of wanted to ask, it feels like the opening of a show like this for you is also like an opportunity and a space for possibility. So what haven't you done yet that you think that you want to go on to doing next?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm giving myself to the end, till when this show closes, to think of something new.
Clock is ticking.
And what I'm going to do is sit in front of my computer and empty my mind, and hopefully something will come in, and then I'll have to keep doing that until something does come in.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of old pieces that I have never finished. But it's again a balancing act between wanting to do something new and wanting to, and I just don't know what it's going to be.
Well, who's on your bucket list for people that you want to make portraits of? That's maybe a good place to think.
Well, recently I'm afflicted with Parkinson's disease, so I'm not as nimble as I was. So I don't know really what I can do in terms of production and camera, so I have to think about that.
Yeah. Now, do folks have questions for Charlie? That I think we've got microphones. Folks coming around. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Hello. My name is Klee. I had the chance of being Jeff actually at a more intimate space at the AMARP studio, which is really awesome. He's the same way that he is here as he is in a closed-door environment, which is great. He loves acknowledging people. And to you, Mr. Atlas, I appreciate you being an individual that has the curiosity and itch and always attacking it and always showing it and showcasing it in different environments. When I was walking through the space, I actually wanted to dance within it. Please. And see where I would end up and like re-mimic the dancers in front of me, which is very special that I felt so strongly about that because I come from a culture of dancing. So it's really like, wow, someone sees it. So my question to you is, I feel like that we've lost dancing in our current generation, current, time frame. So how do we get it back? How do we get back to that itch of just dancing and showcasing the individuals around us?
I'm not quite sure.
He responded positively to your work by wanting to move along with it, and he's feeling like something has been lost in the way of like people not dancing as much, and wondered if you had any advice about how to get back to that.
Oh.
Go to clubs, right? That's what you would say.
Yeah, I used to go to clubs like 4 or 5 nights a week.
Most of our conversations usually comprise me asking Charlie, did you go to the Paradise Garage? Have you been to David Mancuso's loft? Did you go to this club? Did you go to that club?
So I stopped when I was 60.
Why? Got old.
Lee passed away, and it wasn't as much fun anymore.
But how do we get back to dancing, do you think? Or do you think it's really gone?
People are still doing it. I miss it. But I don't want to go to a club and just bob my head.
Yeah.
That's really sad.
That's what I do. Other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. I have had like a very privileged position at the ICA to be a visitor assistant for 3 months, the whole duration of your exhibit. And I remember the first day I walked in through the exhibit, I stopped at the Mathematics of Consciousness and I listened to the whole thing. And I was like really struck by those like moments in between where someone is giving a monologue and it's about like, how people perceive the world. And I like really connected with it. And I wasn't really sure how to look for the source of that monologue. So I was wondering if you could like give me the source so I can listen again.
The Mathematics of Consciousness, where do the monologues come from?
Well, I was very interested in physics and science and consciousness and memory and mathematics, and I wanted to give people something to think about. So I've read a lot of books and tried to make simplified versions of kind of questions that I thought people could maybe think about, and then I had someone read them.
That's really cool. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions?
Yes, I do.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
it's just very convenient.
You're right there.
First, I just want to say thank you so much for your work. I just saw it before this talk. I was really curious about your approach to editing, in that you have experience with both film and live performance dance, and that editing is almost like this craft that's unique to cinema. And I was really curious about your approach to editing from both a performance and time-based medium.
Well, editing has been very important to me from, how I said, mid-70s on through the 1990. I was obsessed with editing, being frame accurate and knowing which frame to edit on. For the first 10 years of my work, I never made a dissolve, because I thought that was cheating. And I learned that from Merce pretty much, about the rhythm of things. And I don't know, I developed a style that I can recognize as I don't let things go on too long. I don't know.
Do you edit differently when you're making like a single channel video for television or something in the 80s than you do when you're like doing live
Live video you can't is uncontrollable. I mean, so that's the fun part of it. But when I have things that I can control, I do control them.
I got to experience the exhibition a few weeks ago, and I was really pleased, putting it lightly, at how embracing it was of queerness. And I feel it's impossible to deny what we're going through at this moment, and it was very much appreciated to enter a space that seemed almost like a church to queerness, and how liberating it was to move through these installations and these wonderful portrayals of our ancestors and transcestors. And I guess I would like to know, as you ponder in what you're going to do after this exhibition, do you envision creating such spaces for us to feel not only nurtured but also enthralled and inspired to push forward?
Oh, that's very nice. But I don't think that I could have an intention like that. I think I would just have an intention to make something that pleases me and that makes me feel happy. And hopefully that transfers over to other people. I don't... Excuse me. I don't really think about the reception so much when I'm making something. But I'm glad that it feels like me that this was the right time to do this piece. I'm glad I'm glad that we did it before now. And I do think that it is celebratory.
It's interesting because, like, to that note, Eileen Miles, who wrote a text in the catalog, said there are like kind of two approaches to the question, and that you come from the party part rather than the protest part, so that it would be celebratory and joyous. I think is in keeping with how you've always seen yourself in relationship to these different communities, and how you've also had a magnetic attraction to, queer clubs, to drag performances, to these places, because as you've said, it's like those are places where you saw the freest expression, and that was the aspect you're interested in.
It's really my life. It's really my life. I brought my life into my work very much. And most of the people who have been in my work are friends first. And I'm still friends.
Any other questions that folks have?
I was just curious if you could talk about any moving image artists that inspired you, like experimental filmmakers or video artists.
Well, early on, I was a film buff, and I went to movies incessantly. When I came to New York, dropped out of school, came to New York, and just went to the movies all the time. Before video, this was. So, and so all my real reference, I felt like I learned filmmaking and video making from watching films. And so my big heroes are mainly filmmakers, and like Sam Fuller, Vincent Minnelli, D.W. Griffith, I mean, the whole bunch of them. Dreyer, Mitsuguchi. These are the people that Godard, I mean, that I look to. And you really get influenced when you're in your 20s. And so that's those, and the artists that influenced me are like Bob Rauschenberg and Andy Warhol and Jasper Johns. And after that, I respect a lot of artists, but there's no one that's like.
Seems like this is the last show I'll ever do then. I think we have time for one more question.
This is a bit random, but the first exhibit with the 4 tombstones with the different years, for 2003, I noticed a clip of Mariah Carey's Glitter, the film.
Of what?
Glitter, the film
Mariah
by...
Carey's Glitter.
Oh, that was from yeah.
I was just curious what's
That's
the
from a
connection?
live mix I did in collaboration with Christian Fennesz. I have a practice of doing live mixes off of computers in conjunction with improvisation with a musician, and my set usually is about 150 clips, and then I just play with them. And Mariah was always in my clip sense.
All right, thank you.
Well, Charlie, now I have to try to say thank you to you without crying, but I know that you're a sad sack just like me, so only they can judge us. But I just want to say it's the honor of a lifetime to have worked on this with you. I don't take for granted how special it was of an opportunity for me, and to finally give you your flowers and to do this exhibition with you. And I think the best compliment that I've heard multiple times from visitors is that I went through the galleries and it's just so full of love. And I was always so inspired to think in the 90s when someone asked you, how do you choose the people that you collaborated with? And you said, love. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much for bringing so much love to the museum at a time when we all really need it, and I love you, and I'm just forever indebted to you, so thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.